Well, hi, in this short talk I want to ask the question, what is the gospel? And I believe that this can be summed up in one simple word, and that word is redemption. Now, I found it very difficult to find some modern day examples of redemption, but I did find two quite remarkable and moving stories, which I'll come to in just a moment. First, let me go right back to the beginning. Our Bibles make it very clear that God wanted to extend his family, so he made us. It was his decision to create. You see, love is relational. It operates within relationships and friendships. God was going to enlarge his family, and love is something in you that you choose to do, you choose to express. And the need to love and be loved is a likeness or a characteristic of God put there by him, and it's deeply seated within both men and women. And so God got to work. He exploded this universe into being over billions of years. Stars and galaxies, the heavens coalesced and formed, our earth formed, our atmosphere developed, seas and dry land appeared, a countless array of plants and animals. The awesome creativity of God took place. And he looked at the result and he said it was good, or the word in Hebrew is tov. And then he continued, and there was a peak in God's creative work as both men and women were formed, and at that God broke out into poetry. As amazing and awesome and staggering as his creation had been up to that point, it was only when we came along that God's heart skips a beat and he bursts into poetry. What went before was good, but of this God said it was meod tov, very good. It means beautiful, bountiful, pleasing. And the relationship with God was close. It was so close that God would walk and talk with them right here on earth in the cool of the evening. But disobedience changed it all, and as sinfulness, greed, lust, eventually murder and death entered into this family, God withdrew to a distance. Rarely would God ever get so close to men and women again. There are a few exceptional glimpses, Abraham and Enoch amongst them. But God would not presence himself with men and women in the same way until Jesus would come millennia later. There will be a time in the future, of course, when God will make his dwelling place with men and women, and I cannot wait. But right now things are different. We are between the ages, as Paul would say. Our sin and disobedience has somewhat distanced God from mankind. And this was a risk that God was prepared for. There could be no other way, you see. A relationship built on love means that each party must be free to decide. Each party has to be free to be faithful or unfaithful. Each party has to have the option to walk away. The alternative was to create a situation where there was no choice. To create a family that was programmed to love and faithfulness. And that means either the creation of pets or robots. And God did not want a family of pets that would love him instinctively, but would not really choose to. He didn't want a family of robots that were pre-programmed to love him and to be faithful to him. He wanted friends, children in his own image, friends that he could converse with and share life with, eat with, laugh with, cry with, stay with, friends with the ability to choose. You know, all the way through the Bible, God likens his relationship with his people as a marriage. He continually appeals to them to be faithful. He says in Hosea, "You've divorced me, but I have not divorced you, and I never will." And he appeals to them again and again, longing for the day when they will call him husband again. Instead, they chose to pursue other things and other gods. And the story of Hosea is amazing. God told Hosea to marry a prostitute and love and care for her deeply. And after bearing 3 children, one of which was not even his, she left and she goes back to her old way of life. And God told Hosea to go and buy his wife back from the pimp that was controlling her. Buy her back at a price. Restore their relationship. And this demonstrated just what God was going to do for us. He was going to win us back, but there would be a price. And this act of buying us back, or buying back at a price, is called redemption. Indeed, the word redeem means to buy back at a price. We needed a hero, a rescuer, a redeemer, a substitute, a scapegoat. Now here is the tension that we need to understand. Whilst God is full of mercy, he is a righteous God, and he cannot just ignore sin and say that sin doesn't matter. We need redeeming. Like Hosea's wife, we needed somebody worthy that would pay the price and redeem us, rescue us. Now, as I said, I did a lot of research to find a modern day equivalent of redemption, and there are very, very few stories out there, but here are two. There was a Frenchman, his name was Arnaud Beltrame. He was born in Étampes in France on April the 18th, 1973. He joined the French military, where he rose to become a lieutenant colonel. Later he transferred to the French police, the gendarmerie. Now sometime later, on the 24th of March 2018 at 11 o'clock in the morning, this is 25 days before Beltrame's 45th birthday, an Islamic State terrorist called Redouane Lakhdim stormed a supermarket in Trèbes in France. He was armed with a handgun, a hunting knife and 3 homemade bombs. He shot 2 people dead, and he took numerous people hostage. And the police negotiated for the release of all of these hostage except for one, a female cashier, a relatively young mum. Her name was Julie. And Lakhdim determined that he would keep one hostage for his own safety, and he refused to give her up. Now, Arnaud Beltrame did not grow up as a believer, but at the age of 33, he came to a profound faith in Jesus. And by the time of our story, he'd recently gone through a civil wedding, and he was planning a church wedding in just a few weeks' time. But during this siege, he now unhesitatingly offered to take the place of Julie, and her release was secured as he took her place. Well, it turned out to be a fatal substitution. Arnaud Beltrame sustained 4 bullet wounds, but he died eventually from a stab wound to the throat. Now that is what a redeemer looks like. Somebody who stood in the place of another, somebody who bore their troubles in their place, someone who knew the cost but chose to do it anyway. Remarkable story. The second story is about a man called Maximilian Kolbe. He was a Polish Franciscan friar, and he dared to preach against the Nazis in Poland. He was born in 1894, the son of a weaver. His mum was a midwife. His dad was German, and so the Nazis offered him the rights, the freedoms and the protections of a German citizen. But he refused to sign the Volkslist, as it was known. Over time, he did some remarkable things. He hid 2,000 Jews from German persecution in the Nepokolonov friary. He was secretly printing and distributing anti-Nazi flyers, but eventually he was discovered, arrested and brutally sent to Auschwitz concentration camp. His prison number tattoo was 16670. He acted as a priest to the prisoners and was subjected to all sorts of violent harassments, including beatings and lashings that left him very close to death on numerous occasions. Now, at the end of July 1941, a prisoner escaped from the concentration camp, and this prompted the deputy camp commander, a man called Karl Fritz, to pick 10 men at random to be starved to death in a bunker that was called the starvation room, and this punishment was to deter further escape attempts. Well, when one of the selected men, a man called Franciszek Gajonicek, cried out, "My wife, my children," Kolbe immediately volunteered to take his place. He bravely stepped out of the line. He walked straight up to Karl Fritz and requested to take the man's place. He would have been shot on the spot, but Fritz was so astonished at this man that he let it be so, it says. And to everyone's astonishment, he was not shot on the spot. So he was led off to the starvation room with the 9 others. According to an eyewitness who was an assistant janitor at the time, a prisoner, Colby would lead the prisoners in prayer continuously. They would sing hymns, and sometimes the guards would scream at them to be silent. Each time the guards checked on him, he was standing or kneeling in the middle of the cell and looked calmly at those who entered. After they'd been starved and deprived of water for 2 weeks, only Colby and 3 others remained alive. The guards wanted the bunker emptied, so they gave the 4 remaining prisoners lethal injections of carbolic acid. Colby is said to have raised his left arm and calmly waited for that deadly injection. He died on the 14th of August 1941. The man whom he replaced, Francis Gajonicek, survived the camp. He was reunited with his wife, Helena, and his children. He lived his life saying, "So long as I have breath in my lungs, I consider it my duty to tell the people all about the heroic act of love by Maximilian Kolbe." Francis died peacefully and gratefully in southwest Poland in 1995 at the grand age of 93. That is what a Redeemer looks like. No greater love is there than this, that a man gives up his life for another. And the Bible tells us in 1 John, this is why God sent Jesus into the world, to be our substitute. He was our substitute. And Hebrews 4 tells us clearly that Jesus lived a perfect life, full of obedience to Abba, his dad, sinless, making him the only person in history who did not deserve God's judgment. And for this reason, he could legitimately become our substitute. And an extraordinary exchange was to take place, our guilt for his innocence. He took our place, he took our punishment. In Gethsemane, he was to suffer terrible anxiety at the expectation of what was coming. He was to be let down by his disciples. He was betrayed by one of them, arrested, taken up these very steps to the villa of Joseph ben Caiaphas. At the top of these steps, Jesus heard a cockerel crowing, and he turned in concern for his dear friend Peter, who broke down in tears when he realized that Jesus knew he had denied him. One of his closest friends denied even knowing him. He was taken to a man called Annas for questioning. "Why do you question me?" Jesus answered. "All that I've said and done was in public." And immediately an officer struck him. He was then sent to Caiaphas the high priest, and here he kept largely silent. When asked a direct question, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of God?" he simply answered, "You've said it, and now I too say it. The Son of Man will soon be sitting at the right hand of God." And with those very brave words, his fate was sealed. They spat in his face, struck him, ridiculed him, challenged him. The high priest tore his clothes, called for his death. He was beaten, almost unrecognizable as a human being, and he was crucified outside the city walls on a very busy road, almost certainly the road to Damascus, which runs alongside the tallest part of Mount Moriah. He was taunted, the people shouting, "He saved others, but he can't save himself." Oh, how they misunderstood. They cried out, "He's the King of the Jews. Well, let him come down from the cross, then we'll believe him." The Pharisees would call out. Jesus looked at the crowd. "God forgive them, they don't know what they're saying." Now, Jesus had never known anything but closeness with his Father. The same deep, deep friendship that they had had before the incarnation had continued on earth. And now we're told that between the hours of noon and 3 in the afternoon, for 3 hours there was darkness across the land as God turned his back on his own Son. Why? Because our sins were heaped upon his shoulders. This exchange was taking place. He was rejected by God so that we may not be rejected. He took our rejection upon himself as he bore God's alienation. And you get the sense that this was the most sickening of moments for Jesus. You get the sense that even he did not quite know how bad it was going to be, separated from his dad because of our sins. My God, why have you forsaken me? And he was forsaken by God, abandoned by God, deserted by God, which is what forsaken means, in order that we may not be, that we would be accepted by him. His relationship with his Father was brutally dislocated so that our relationship with the Father might be restored. This really was the worst time of it for Jesus. He was given a drink of wine vinegar on a stick and soon after committed himself into God's hands with the words, "It's finished." The plan was complete. You know, the Jews have often been blamed for the death of Jesus, but that's not true. It was God's idea. Sometime earlier, Jesus had said to his followers, "I lay down my life of my own accord, for this is the charge I have been given by my Father." You read that in John 10. It was their idea, and Jesus had a choice, and he chose us. He chose to do his Father's will and carry out the charge that had been given to him. Let me finish briefly by talking about something in Judaism called the scapegoat. Once each year, at a time called Yom Kippur, 2 goats were selected. One was sacrificed, and the other, the scapegoat, was taken by the high priest, who laid his hands on the goat, and the sins of the people were symbolically laid upon the head of the goat. And this goat was taken, driven from the camp, or later driven from Jerusalem, about 5 or 6 miles, to a desolate place from where it would never return. And 2,000 years ago, Jesus became both of these goats. He was both to die for us and take our sin upon his shoulders that we might be put right. He was both the goat that died and the scapegoat. Now, the word scapegoat is quite misunderstood. The Hebrew word is Azazel, and this word is used in every case for this scapegoat. It's related to the word departure. A departure took place. God turned his back on his own Son. He departed from him in order that he could turn his face towards us. What kind of love is this? The transaction was complete. Our sin was laid upon him, and his innocence was gifted to us. He was rejected so that we could become again acceptable. He became our Redeemer, paid the price. He took the hit. He redeemed us, brought us at a price, set us free. How can we be anything but eternally grateful to our amazing hero? God bless.